What does a contraction feel like? How do I know if I'm in labor? And what does the day of labor look like? Wait, is this normal? Hey, I'm Heidi. My best friends call me Hides. I'm a certified birth doula, host of this podcast, and author of Birth Story, an interactive pregnancy guidebook. I have supported hundreds of women through their labor and deliveries, and I believe every one of them and you deserves a microphone and a stage. So here we are. Listen each week to get answers to these tough questions. Birth Story, where we talk about pregnancy, labor, deliveries, where we tell our stories and share our feelings. And of course, chat about our favorite baby products and motherhood. And because I'm passionate about birth outcomes, you will hear from some of the top experts in labor and delivery. Whether you are pregnant, trying desperately to get pregnant, or you just love a good birth story, I hope you will stick around and be part of this birth story family. You guys, my book is out. It is out in the world. I cannot believe it. I have been writing it for several years, and it's just mind-blowing. Birth Story, Pregnancy Guidebook and Journal is a one-of-a-kind discovery into your pregnancy that provides you education through storytelling. So what's it really about? In the 16 years that I have served women with every personality type, I noticed there was a huge disconnect between what my clients were craving for childbirth education in a book and the books that were actually available on the market. There seemed to be unlimited resources if you are looking for an unmedicated birth or a natural birth or a home birth. But there just weren't a lot of resources for my clients who were part of the 92% of women birthing in a hospital and very much open to medical interventions like an epidural, nitrous oxide, and opioid medications. So I wrote that book to fill the gap for you. Week by week throughout your pregnancy, you will engage with material meant to educate and empower you as you plan for your own birth story. Hospital, medicated, unmedicated, or something in between. You are welcomed each week with a postcard from the womb, which is an adorable note from your baby about their miraculous development, as well as the amazing changes occurring within you. Then you are invited to use an uplifting birth affirmation and to respond to an introspective journaling prompt to document your feelings, curiosities, and wonders every single week. With room to memorialize your own birth story, this book will become a memory keeper and a legacy gift for your baby. You are encouraged to read one of my favorite birth stories each week, filled with childbirth education, tidbits, and explanations of important medical terms and procedures. These are real-life accounts shared with permission from the births that I've attended during my career as a doula. And I gave you a great mix. In the 42-week guide to your pregnancy and 42 birth stories, 7 of them end in cesarean section. About half are unmedicated and the other half are medicated deliveries. This is a judgment-free book. So take what you need from each element and leave the rest. Okay, are you ready to buy? I would love for you to go to birthstory.com and buy it directly from me. But I totally get it if you're an Amazon girl. You can head to amazon.com and just type in Birth Story Pregnancy, and the book should pop up. I'll deliver it straight to your doorstep. And I would venture to say that you might be an audiobook kind of woman because you're listening to a podcast. So if you would prefer to listen to this book, then I have recorded it and it is available for download at audible.com or on your Audible app. Thank you for being part of the Birth Story community. I am so excited for you to have this book in your hand once you've purchased it and it has arrived. I hope that you will give me your thoughts and feedback, and don't forget to take a selfie with your book and post it on Instagram and tag at Birth Story Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Birth Story Podcast. If you are tuning in for the first time, I want to encourage you to start at the beginning. I want you to go on a journey with me and allow me to be your virtual doula and teach you all the things along the way. So I'm just going to give you a couple highlights of some of the earlier podcast episodes if you are just now tuning in. So very first episode, episode 1, you can learn all about me, who I am, why I became a doula, why it is I do what I do, and also my very own birth story with my second child, Jagger. Then I've interviewed some really cool CEOs. So episode 3, Tori Jones is the CEO of eShell Triangle, and she was also featured on Rachel Hollis's The Rise podcast. Episode 7 was Rachel Coley, the CEO of Can Do Kiddo. She was just on Good Morning America. She's an incredible occupational therapist that teaches you how to play with your baby, and her birth stories are incredible. Episode 10 was one of my best friends, Amy, who had a VBAC in the car. We have done episodes on micro preemies, episode 18, 21 on international adoption out of Uganda, 24 and 25. Oh, those episodes like Get a Box of Tissues. They're on surrogacy and cancer. We've addressed hypnobirthing, fertility, really easy, joyful, medicated births, really hard, long labors, medicated, unmedicated, everything in between. So I hope you'll start at the beginning. Let the Birth Story podcast take you on a journey all the way through, and enjoy this episode. And then remember to rewind all the way back to episode 1. Thanks for tuning in. Okay, Daddy Boot Camp continued with Justin, Chris, and Kaz. And if you're just tuning in and you're like, what is Heidi talking about? Stop, rewind, go back. That is part 1 of the second round of Daddy Boot Camp. And then this episode is part 2. If you've been listening, thanks for hanging in. This is incredible. And we're just getting to the meat of Justin, Chris, and Kaz's birth stories and experiences with their partners. Thank you for listening. Please write a review. Give us some feedback. Let these dads and partners know what you think about this episode.
I come back in the room and, the nurse leaves and Jess explains it to me. Doctor came in. Doctor was really, really cool. And things kind of like, the one nurse was kind of snippy, right? But shift changes at 7. So she left, new crew came in. It was all good. Now, this is where my days do not match up to what Jess's memories are, which makes sense because my experience was much different. But I think I want to say they started Pitocin initially.
What day was this?
This was on Tuesday.
This was a Tuesday.
Yeah,
okay.
So this is Tuesday, 1 p.m. we started. Right?
Okay.
Did they start with the Pitocin? I think they did. And then they did the balloon.
Cytotec?
They did that after the first round of Pitocin.
Okay.
So I think they did the balloon first, right? And that was interesting, not in a good way, to be a part of, where they do 2 separate balloons, and one is to help dilate the cervix, and I don't even know what the other one was. There were 2, and that didn't do as much as like we had hoped. And
it's to put pressure. So it's a fully bulb catheter.
Okay.
So it's supposed to it inflates with saline,
right,
and it's meant to put pressure on the cervix and then to stretch it open.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it.
So that wasn't a pleasant experience for her, I could tell, obviously. And then it didn't work. So the doctors were great. Doctor came in and was like, there's a couple, we'll continue with the Pitocin.
I'm going to jump in real quick.
Absolutely.
Teaching opportunity. So they give you 12 hours with a fully bulb catheter, and the fully bulb will naturally fall out when you're dilated to 5 centimeters.
So they put it in to stretch. Then once it hits the goal, then
it'll just fall out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
But in Jess's case, it never
did
fell out because her cervix didn't thin and open to 5 centimeters.
Right. So that first night really wasn't that bad, right? Because she got to sleep and she wasn't on like monitoring, and she wasn't
not allowed to eat because she had gestational diabetes.
She couldn't eat. She could have ice chips and water. And so the next morning, whatever the 12-hour gap was, right? They removed it. And then we started like, what are the options, right? So her water hadn't broke, like mucus plug, none of that stuff. So we kind of went through that for another day, right? And they did the Pitocin. Then they mentioned Cytotec. And of course, she immediately started doing research on Cytotec. And if you do research on Cytotec, it's not something that you'd probably be inclined to like want to do or want to have your wife do. But had a really great conversation with the doctor who has 3, and she was like, if it was your wife, this is Jess's way of doing it. She's want to make a decision that would be detrimental to the health of the baby. And he's like, I would do it. Like, it's safe for what we're trying to do. So we did that. Didn't do anything. And they're like, well, we can break your water. And a lot of times that starts. And this is probably Wednesday afternoon. Does that make sense?
She'd been there a full 24
I
hours.
think we're kind of on Thursday
morning.
by
Yeah,
now.
you're right.
Yeah.
Thursday morning. So
Just so everybody knows, I have been coming and going.
yeah, she was Heidi ruled. She would bring me
Just so I'm clear with Cass that I did show up every day.
So Heidi
bring
came
us full circle here.
I was hoping for active labor every day. I was ready to go.
Cass was ready to toss you under the bus.
So.
Heidi came the first night and set the room up, and it was amazing, like lights and moon and like a waterfall, diffuser. Yeah. We had like words of affirmation, and it was some scripture around the room. It was great. So fast forward to Thursday, we can break your water, and she was determined to be like natural, right? So that we had another doctor that came, and that was great. And she's like, look, you've been in some, she's having contractions through this time, but they're very mild, and they started to peak, and I would be like watching them on and be like, oh yeah, this is it. And then it wasn't it. And I think Heidi was being very realistic with her conversations with Jessica about being like, this is uncomfortable and you're not enjoying this, and you've like nothing. And then it was
you mean nothing? I think this is the tip of the iceberg.
Like, I was like, if you have any pain on your pain scale, I remember telling Jessica, like, if you think you're feeling like a 1 or a 2, like this is like a -2.
Right.
Like wow. But this is the thing, the fatigue starts to set in, right, and the exhaustion.
And the hunger.
Your hunger.
Yeah.
So now your threshold, like a really strong woman, after 3 days of not sleeping, not eating, kind of prodromal labor, people poking and prodding at you, your threshold is now down here.
Right.
So this is from like my perspective, where I knew I was going to have to evolve that conversation to help Jessica come to terms with being okay with some medical interventions to have a better experience.
Yeah. And by this time, she was on full monitoring. So the baby was being monitored, which means she couldn't get out of bed. So after that 24-hour period of not being able to eat or anything, she wasn't allowed to leave the bed.
Oh, man.
So couldn't go to the bathroom, couldn't like go to the, she couldn't get in the tub. We couldn't walk around, any of that stuff. So it's not.
So are you just using the bathroom in a bedpan at this point?
She is a catheter. I mean, catheter. Right?
Okay.
So, and then it was either across the hall or a door down. Someone must have like swept in and been right in labor, but it sounded like the Bates Hotel. Like she was like, "Can you turn that music up?" And I was like, "Why?" I was playing Zelda on the Switch. I didn't know what was going on. And she's like, "You can't hear that lady screaming?" And I'm like, "No." And I turned down. I was like, "Oh my Lord!"
Someone like was literally in transition, like natural labor transition,
right?
Like a wall apart, and it was vibrating.
Right.
Wow,
and it was
probably
it might have been us.
It was
pretty
brutal.
So.
And then I think it was funny because my memory could be, I don't even know if it's true, but I remember it seemed like a couple minutes, and then they played that damn song. Like there's a baby being, and then Jess was like, "We've been here for 3 days. Are you kidding me?" Like every time she heard that, I think there was a little bit for both of us of being like, "Man." Like
they should make that not play inside the rooms of laboring women. Like the hallway is great, but like let's not play that song when laboring women are trying really hard to have their baby.
Yeah,
that's a good call.
A little tricky. And so after that conversation, she was like, "I think," and the doctor's like, your uterus is a giant muscle, and it's been in some form of activity for 2 to 3 days now. That's not good because that can lead to hemorrhaging, right? Which can be detrimental. So basically we get to the point where the doctor is willing to do an epidural before they break her water, which we thought was cool. And we decided to go that route, and they did that, and they broke her water. We continued with Pitocin and Cytotec. And I was super excited because we got to a point where they really were getting closer together and started, increasing in intensity. And then after that would happen, it would just kind of basically like peter back down. And throughout this whole process, Heidi's like in and out.
So you're doing the emotional roller coaster even in the hospital too.
It was wild. Yeah. And she just could not, she couldn't even get out of bed. So we got to a point.
And like clinically, this is just her uterus is tired, right? It's been kind of overworked, but didn't really lead to cervical change.
Right.
And then her uterus is really tired. So no matter, like, I think one of the things that I want people to hear from your story is like, when you're induced early, Like no matter what you can throw every drug out there, every medical device out there. Like if your body physiologically is not ready,
it doesn't make a difference.
It's not happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, we definitely absolutely got to that point. And I think Tuesday, Wednesday, it's probably on Friday where they were talking about one more round of Cytotec and another round of Pitocin. And she was basically like, I need some time. I need to get unattached from stuff. I need to walk around. I need to eat. And so the doctors came and they agreed to it. It was great because they were like, you can have something light to eat. And she was like, I want Doritos and a sub. I'm like, all right, that'll work. Like, oh, good. Sounds good to me.
After
so,
like 3.5 days of no food.
Right, have whatever you want. So they agreed to, I think it was, they gave us 4 hours and they were going to let everything kind of try to get Pitocin out of her system and give us 4 hours. So we walked around the hospital, just the 8th floor. That's as far as they would let us go. And I drove down and got us some sandwiches and some chips. And we sat there and we watched, I think it's the first time we put the TV on, watched something on TV. And they came back about 4 hours later and they started the next process. They got approval. So Pitocin, I guess typically they only go up to 20. They got approval because Ethan's heart rate was at 155 the whole time.
Oh, wow.
He was super baby, super strong. So we have approval to go up to 30. Okay. And we'll see if that does it, right? Like last ditch effort.
So did you have the same doctor for all 4 days? So they were rotating over the 24 hours.
Yeah, rotating doctor.
So how many did you see? 4, probably 5?
5 doctors.
5 doctors.
And each one of them
were awesome.
Had a different plan.
Yeah, totally different strategies, right? Like different strategies.
Just like the second opinion. It was like everyone had a different plan for them.
That adds a whole other layer of complexity to this whole thing.
And we were really fortunate because they all listened to us. And I think they were really amenable to Heidi when those conversations came up. I think we saw over 30 nurses, 27, I think is the number we counted.
Wow.
And we had Mandy, who is the greatest nurse of all time. She's amazing.
Shout out to Mandy.
Yeah.
Mandy came on again.
She requested her next shift to be back with us. And we probably, without her and Heidi, it would have been a totally different experience. So just nominate her for the Daisy Award. I hope she wins it.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Yeah. But let's just throw in, like, to even further complicate matters. Like, there was a moment where Jess was like, I'm feeling kind of blurred vision. Mm-hmm. And it was like her blood sugar was low.
Yeah.
And then the epidural came out.
Yeah. So that was... That was not good. So Heidi this was Friday morning, I'm guessing, I think.
It must have been.
Yeah. So Jess is like, wow, this is like intense. This is, so I think I'm texting Heidi. I'm like, she's like, does she know how to use the button on it? I'm like, yeah. She's like pushing it. I was like, okay. And then she out of nowhere, like it was like an exorcist moment where she lost her mind on me. Where looking back, it's one of the funniest things that ever happened in my life. As it was going on, it was funny, but I knew I couldn't laugh. I was terrified, like absolutely terrified too. Yeah, she used words I've never heard come out of her mouth. So I knew something was up. We were having a baby or something had happened. And Heidi was like, ask the anesthesiologist to make sure everything's good. And I think right when you got back to the hospital with my hazelnut latte, thank you very much, was when the anesthesiologist had just left, I believe.
They had just replaced it because I had said, if her button is not working, like she needs to get her epidural replaced.
Right.
So anybody listening, 12 to 15% of epidurals need to be replaced.
Yeah. So hers came out. That's why she was in so much pain.
Got it.
So she had kind of like a linebacker nurse. The one time we saw her overnight, that when she was flipping her, I was like, I just remember kind of waking up and being like, whoa, what's going on over there? So it probably happened. Like,
but wait, did you say linebacker nurse?
Yeah.
You did say linebacker nurse.
He kind of flew through that. I want to make sure I heard that properly.
That's what I mean. I remember, it's dark. I'm asleep. It's like, is that a panther? I don't know what's happening. But the look on Jess's face when they were like, oh, the epidural came out, I was like, okay, I'm leaving the room. Like, I don't know what to do. And then the anesthesiologist is like, well, we can do a spinal or we can replace it. And I'm like, well, spinal doesn't sound good. But you were actually there because I left. So you were back. Mm-hmm. And Jess actually said, I would prefer Heidi to be here for the epidural. Right. So I went to Earl's and drank beer. To be perfectly honest, I went and got a poke bowl and had some beer.
You needed a breather.
Right.
And you got that breather. And I think you came back re-energized.
Yeah, I did for sure. It was great because, Heidi kind of like, she basically like engulfed her and prayed over her and just spoke to her because the epidural is no joke from, it's not a pleasant experience. So that was another thing that we went through. And then I think when so the next round of Pitocin and Cytotec, I want to say we got up to a 26. And we had an awesome, probably the best doctor, all the ones we've seen. This was her second shift with us. And we were kind of like bouncing, like, what do we do? Is it C-section time? Do we keep, because Jess was like adamant, right? Everything she had kind of wanted to happen hadn't happened yet, but she was still holding out that she could have a vaginal birth. And that was very important to her. And she wasn't going to make a decision because she knows herself well enough where she would never outlive that guilt. So she said, I want to have a C-section. She would have always questioned herself, like, why did I decide to do that? So she had a conversation with the doctor and she was great. And the doctor was like, she said to the doctor, what would you do? And she was like, well, how long have you been here? The doctor was really strategic looking back because she never said this is what I would do.
Like in the line of questioning and the conversation.
Right.
How?
She looked at her chart. She went and got her full chart and looked at it and kind of looked and she mapped out some time. And she's like technically speaking, this is now it is considered a medically failed induction. And my recommendation is for your health and the health of the baby, you have a C-section. Gotcha. And that's all we needed.
Yep.
And then it was like, okay, 45 minutes to get your shit together and move to the recovery room. And I was like, whoa, wait a second. Do we have give us a minute. And Jess and I talked about it afterwards because I remember having a conversation with you about you have your OR credentials and did we want you to be in the room? And I was like, yes. And then we never had that conversation with anyone else. And we didn't even realize it until after we had the baby. Because it was like chaos. And I'm running stuff to the car and then like figuring out what do I need to take to recovery. And then I'm in scrubs and like, it was the most surreal thing ever.
Yeah.
So we went in on Tuesday.
I was going to say, I took my role different at that point. Like I came in and you were getting kind of dressed and then I, put on some worship music.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And had a good cry with Jess and just this release. Mm-hmm. I think it was just like this moment of release and praising God the baby was on his way and that this whole ordeal was going to be over.
Yeah. It was intense for me too.
Was the release because you guys knew it was happening? You'd been there for 5 days and this is going to happen in the next 45 minutes. Was that it?
That was a huge, I think the biggest part of it was like, so people always say like, it's okay to not be okay. Right.
Yeah,
Which I firmly believe. I think now it's a little bit cliche, but that was the point where it was like, it's not okay. And that's all right. Like we're finally there. We're going to have a son.
Right.
Somehow this is going to happen. But then to know like, it was the right thing to do. That's what meant the most to her and to me. To be perfectly honest, the thing that meant the most to me, even before the health of my unborn child, was that she was okay.
Right.
It's like I wanted this to be whatever she wanted it, whatever she needed it to be. And at that point, it worked. That was going to be all right for us. And there was a giant, like calming, serene, like excitement. And like Jess and I remember having like a moment there was a very intense like connection. Been like, that now it's kind of real. Because up until that point, going from what our journey had been, it wasn't real for me. I mean, it was, but it was always like,
so that fear that we were talking about.
Like, right. And it was ruling my heart, which is the word. But the more you try to not let that happen, it's like, geez, it's running everything. Right. But at that point it was like when I was walking to the car, I felt good for the first time about like, and good's an understatement. I felt like really, really okay.
Yeah. Like it was
it might not have been what we wanted to happen. This is absolutely the way it was supposed to go down.
And I'm getting ready to have a son in about 45 minutes.
Right.
I mean, I think that's a lot of people that if they could understand that at first, because I didn't understand it until I heard it the first time. Like one of the nurses said to us when we got there, you're getting ready to meet your son in 45 minutes.
Yeah, that's some heavy stuff.
And that's when like, it was a big thing for me. I was like, oh,
yeah,
exactly. We really are. I like that, and I think it's such an easy statement, but I think it's one of the most powerful things you can hear like in the moment because it sets the stage. It really does, in my opinion.
It was wild. So
you went in there in the operating room
and that was.
Did you look? Did you peek around the corner?
Oh, you haven't heard this part. Yeah, I have to be very strategic in how I tell this. I have my drinking with buddies version, and then.
Well, we're drinking with buddies.
Let's stay with that version.
So Heidi did an amazing job of preparing Jessica for the C-section, and by me listening, I felt like I was prepared. I was not prepared at all.
And at this point, I would say, I thought I was going with you.
Yeah. And I think I thought that you were too. And I didn't realize you weren't until it was done. So we were in recovery. And that's all on me. That's absolutely on me.
But what do you mean by that? Like you weren't, like the sight of it?
Yes.
Her pain? Like what do you mean?
All of it. So they take me into the recovery area where we'll be after the surgery. And it's like 10 or 15 minutes later when she's like, the anesthesiologists are good where they're actually getting ready to like start the procedure. Then they bring me in. So kind of I'm sitting up there with my
you're
wife.
Not in there for the prep?
No, none of the prep work. Right? They're like ready to go. So I come in and I sit up there and she's shaking uncontrollably, right? And that's a byproduct of the anesthesia and the medications they have her on. And that's an uncomfortable sight to see your wife, even though it's not painful. It's an odd thing to see, right? So I'm trying to comfort her, and I'm sure I did something dumb, try to be funny or have a dumb conversation that was probably out of place. I don't really recall what it was. All I remember is the two anesthesiologists were talking about their favorite vegan restaurant in LA. And it's the other dude's talking about the Cubs, which I thought was interesting, but
kind of strange.
I'm going to say it was inappropriate.
Right. I thought it was a little bit odd. Like this is a bigger moment for us. So maybe no conversation.
All right, ding dongs.
It was odd.
Your restaurant in LA.
Yeah.
Why don't you keep quiet for 5 minutes?
It was interesting.
Which kind of goes back to the habitual thing that you were referring to earlier in the podcast. Yeah,
we are creatures of habit. So Mandy was in the OR. So our awesome nurse, she was like the drill sergeant, right? Like a Army guy. So she was like a DI in there, like running stuff. She put on worship music, which was great because she had heard you put it on for Jess. So she had it on in there. And there's a point in time where it's very apparent that things are happening on the other side of that sheet. Like I thought I smelled burning flesh at one time, which I probably didn't, but there's a lot of jostling.
Oh, you did?
Okay.
Oh, yeah, you 100%.
Yeah, you did.
Okay, good.
Wow.
So stuff going on. And then they announce it. They're like, we have a birth, right? And there's like hoops and hollers and everyone's excited and everything. And the anesthesiologist says, do you want to see your son? And I'm like, well, of course I want to see my son. He says, stand up. I don't do well with things that I'm not prepared to see.
Okay.
So I stood up and that was a terrible idea. So I remember them holding my son and then watching. So we did as much of a delayed clamping as you can do in a C-section, right? So I'm seeing the stuff kind of like, blood and everything go through, which was interesting. But then my eyes like dipped down a little bit and that was not interesting. So I was there was a moment where I was 100% sure my wife was dead. And then I was pissed. I was like, why did they murder my wife? Because right?
Everything.
There's a whole lot of stuff going on that I don't need to know about. And then it's the first time in my life when people say like a deer in the headlights, I could not move. Where Jess was like, are you all right? But she's like, why? What's going on?
Just frozen.
Could not divert my eyes.
Really?
Yeah. And
like
at all of it.
Like just the scene.
Yeah, I'm still standing up. And I just, it was wild because it's amazing, right? What they can
surreal.
Do, but when you're not, I was not prepared for that. I don't know what I thought I was going to see. That was it's dumb on my part for sure.
Wow.
And then I kind of snapped out of it, like look around the room, but then they're like counting like all the sponges and the gauze to make sure nothing's left in after the surgery. And thank God there was one. They had a couple of NICU nurses in there because of some of the at-risk stuff. And they were taking like over under on how big he was. Like, is he above 10? Is he going to be like 9? Whatever it was. And they like really did a good job of like, hey, come over here. And so that's kind of when I was able to just bypass that and come back to reality a little bit. Yeah. And I had a son and he was a big boy. He's not a little over 9 pounds. And I got to take him back on the other side of the sheet. But it was weird. I had a experience where when I got to hold him, and I went back to where Jess was, and I stayed there for a couple minutes, and then I went back. But in that moment, I felt really bad because I didn't feel anything. I expected this moment to be like, wow, I'm a father, and this is my son, and this is my boy, and all this stuff. And there was nothing at all. I mean, literally, like, kind of like am I holding this right? It was a very surreal experience. But when I got back to the recovery, I bawled like a baby. Yeah. I mean, I lost my mind.
That makes total sense to me. There was sensory overload.
Like trauma, like in shock, like literal shock. Yeah.
And I felt.
And you're worried about your wife still. Like, how do you even focus on the,
Yeah. And it was really interesting because I think the next day we're sitting in the hospital and we had a really candid, because I would never share that with Jessica. Like, I would never share that with Jess.
And she allowed to listen to this podcast?
Yeah. But she looked over at me and she's like, when you brought him to me, she's like, I really didn't feel what I expected to feel. And she's like, and I felt so like, guilty. We probably don't have a word to describe it. Like, it's a little bit of like guiltiness, I guess. And I was like, oh, thank God you said that. Like, that was a huge relief, because I was like, no, it was because we're both in shock of like what was going on.
And a lot of times too, I'm speaking from the mom's point of view in a C-section, but a lot of times in Christina will probably also, Cass's wife, talk to us. In childbirth, sometimes we forget to think about the baby because we're in survival mode.
Yeah, of course.
So like when you're cut open with your organs, sitting on top of you, like, you want to connect with your baby, but in that moment, your body is and mind are trying to focus on you staying alive.
Absolutely.
And, reserves bonding time for once you're okay. It's kind of like a mammalian response, right? Take care of yourself, then find your baby.
Yeah, fight or flight for sure. But it made me feel there was another way for us to connect.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I feel I wouldn't change our story, and that sounds brutal to say, our journey all the way out, because we've gone through what I think married couples go through in 25, 30 years. We've done it in 4.
It's true.
Yeah.
Like a little over 3, actually. So I'm grateful for that. But I think we know each other so intimately that it's almost scary sometimes. But when she acknowledged that feeling and I could be open and acknowledge that feeling, that was like the last hurdle I think I felt personally, with the fear and the doubt. And that was a huge moment for me.
That's awesome.
And it's been, he's perfect. Our story was perfect. It's exactly how it was supposed to be for us.
Cheers.
Jess will probably not agree.
Cheers.
But
Yay.
Cheers. It was awesome.
Now we're going to take a short break to just share a few things with you. Thanks for listening to the Birth Story podcast. I am so excited to announce the launch of my book, Birth Story, a 42-week guide for your pregnancy, a collection of these birth stories, a ton of doula advice, and journaling prompts. You can order a copy today at birthstory.com. It also will mean the world to me if you'll spread the word about this podcast. So on Stitcher or on iTunes, just leave a review. Thanks. All right, Cass, it's your turn to tell your story about your beautiful daughter, Kennedy.
Yes.
And I thought maybe you could just start with, like, we heard from you earlier that Christina was, she was bouncing on that ball and she was like, I'm going to have a natural childbirth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to highlight real quick on something Justin had said about the traditional family and things like that. We had a phenomenal support group. And that was a big hurdle for us because Christina had both of her parents been married 30 years. My parents both been married 30 years, wanted to be in the room. And one of the issues that we encountered was how many people can be in the room. And, the moms and then the battling of the roles and things like that. So I will be an advocate also for those that do have that support that are looking to accomplish something that might be a little bit different than what your parents or your in-laws may see as part of your birth plan, Yeah. And that was where Christina was. She wanted the natural birth. My mom was, you need to use modern medicine. Her mom was, you need to use modern medicine. And Christina was dead set that this is going to be a natural birth and she needed someone to be there for that. Both of the grandmothers had experienced a natural birth too. So I feel like that was important just to highlight very quickly.
Talk how was that complexity there with the mother-in-laws? Because me and Kelly have talked a lot about it. Because her mother is a piece of work,
right? And
my mother is a piece of work,
right?
In very, 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 very different ways.
Fair enough. I will say that, my mom absolutely 1,000% wanted to be in the room. This was going to be her first grandchild. And
mother?
My mother. And she wanted to be there 100%. Christina's mom knew she was going to be in that room. My mom was just hoping to be. At the end of the day, what the dynamic looked like is 1,000% they both stood behind what Christina wanted. despite the way they may have felt they wanted things to go. Knowing that it was going to be a tough road for Christina, they still sat back. They were in the room during the whole time, and we'll kind of talk about that in the birth story. They sat on the couch quietly, which is difficult for both of them to do, and let Christina.
That's kind of what I meant by my earlier statement.
Yeah. They sat there quietly and really fulfilled the exact role that Christina wanted, and they honored her wishes, which is we couldn't ask for a better scenario with the mothers.
All the paranoia had worked out great anyways.
Absolutely. Because that was definitely a big concern, because they wanted to be there, hands-on, doing it, helping their daughter and daughter-in-law do this thing that they've done multiple times. So, yeah.
That's
absolutely.
Awesome.
So how did you know, how did she know she was in labor?
So, let's see. That night around 8 p.m., on July 3rd, she said she wanted 5 guys. So she grub hubbed some 5 guys. She crushed it. She had came home early from work that day. And this had been the second day in a row that she had came home early from work due to some contractions. Her boss drove her home both times. Her car was left at work.
So, she didn't tell her doula that.
Right. Yeah. This was the second day. Yes. The second time that she had come home from work with contractions. And so I just assumed it was going to be the same thing as the first time. You don't need to be going to work, from here on out. Let's just ride this thing out. So on that second day, on the July 3rd, she came home. I was just expecting the same old. I came home from work. She grubbed up some 5 guys. She ate it. We talked to Heidi that night, said, hey, Christina came home from work. She's feeling some contractions. And I think Heidi said, what you need to do is you need to go. You need to sleep. You need to get as much sleep as you possibly can, just in case it's time. And to be honest, I need to get some sleep because I think you had just done a 3-day bend with
I was probably at Chris's birth.
Probably at Chris's birth. No, it was a little bit different. But
right.
but you I think you had just been on a 2.
No, I was at Jules's birth the day before.
Okay, there you go. So you could have used the 8 hours of sleep as well as us. So told us, go lay down. So it was about 8 o'clock, 8:30. We laid down. By 10:30, which I was just hitting that, that REM
sweet spot,
that REM cycle of sleep, and all of a sudden Christina jumps out of bed, stands up, and her water broke. This is around 10:30, maybe touching on 11, somewhere in there. So we texted Heidi and said, this is where we are. Her water has broke. Christina's standing up, and I remember you describing a water breaking. Will it just be trickle of water? And you're like, no, it'll look like a 2-liter has just emptied on your floor. And that's in fact what it was. But I can remember Christina's like, don't let it ruin the rug, get some towels. And so I'm scrambling for towels,
priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So we get back in bed. We texted Heidi at that point. She's like, so let's, it may be a while from now though. So, just get back comfortable in your bed and start timing the contractions. So we did. And I think within an hour and a half, Christina wanted you there.
Yeah.
It was very soon that she wanted Heidi there. And the contractions weren't unbearable, but they were pretty strong.
Mm-hmm.
Christina was feeling them pretty strong. And I have always given Christina credit for being a very, very strong person and very high pain tolerance. However, I think the first time Heidi talked to her, she was like, what's your pain on a 1 to 10? 10 being someone stabbing you with a knife. And I think she said a 6. Heidi was like, we're in big trouble because this should be a 1 category. So at which point Christina laughed and Heidi's like, okay, well, yeah.
Reframe. I had to do the same thing with Jessica. I was like, reframe.
Let's rethink pain here real quick. So what, Heidi, I would say probably you were at our house by midnight of that.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit early, maybe 11:30.
Yeah, I had never fallen asleep, so that was good. I had plenty of energy.
So showed up, ready to rock and roll, came in, lit some candles. We went ahead and notified the family at that point, hey, Christina's water's broke. We're not going to the hospital. That was a whole nother conversation to have with both sets of parents. Hey, her water broke, but we're not going to the hospital. We're just going to ride this thing out at home for a little while and, then we'll head to the hospital. That was a whole nother conversation, which we had, and they both, respected that. So we're at the house. We lit some candles. We turned on some worship music, some breathing music. I think in fact it was where we started with some breathing music. And we labored in the bed for probably an hour, 30 minutes to an hour. We labored in the bed. And then Heidi suggested that we move to Kennedy's room. It was already set up, ready to go, just waiting on Kennedy to arrive. No idea if it was going to be a boy or a girl. So we were in the baby's room.
How did y'all decide to wait?
So Christina and I both had 2 friends that did it. And in the moment, we were like, they're crazy. There's no way, right? And then when we actually found out we were pregnant, we both kind of looked at each other and were like, do you want to know? I was like, I could go without it. She's like, I could go without it. And that was settled. So we went without it. Yeah. So a lot of grays, a lot of neutrals. You know, the most people that suffer are those that want to get you gifts.
Yeah,
those are the ones that suffer more than anybody else. You know,
we found out on our genetics report.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm in the medical field, so obviously,
yeah.
And I told him, I said, don't send this over if you're going to check the full chromosome.
Right.
Like, I just don't do it. Keep it.
Did you have intent of not knowing?
No. We wanted to do a reveal.
A process.
Yeah,
gotcha.
a reveal. And I do. So got it all straight in the doctor's office, whatever, and sends it over. And Kelly calls. He's like, yeah, it's like buried in page 48 out of 50. You won't even notice it. You don't even know how to read it.
First thing.
3 lines down, Y chromosome positive. I'm like,
love it.
That's how we found out.
And there you are. Yeah, exactly.
Just the most anticlimactic thing in the world.
Very cool.
Sorry, I didn't mean
No, all good,
Yeah.
all good. Yeah, this is what this is for. But yeah, so we went into the baby's room and we labored on a medicine ball. We played music in there. Hampton, our dog, showed up for the party. He was in the room with us for a little while. Really tried to make it as peaceful as possible, which is what Christina wanted. She wanted to labor as long as possible at home before going to the hospital. I basically did what Heidi told me to do. She was like, hey, go to my car and get this. And then I'd go get that ball. And she's like, hey, go to my car and get this. I go get a car, get that. Rub Christina's back right here. And so that's kind of the role I fulfilled. And to be honest, I kind of fall in the same. I wanted to be the coach. I wanted to be the guy, but then I kind of back up and I'm like, I have no clue what I'm doing. As much as I want to be that, I can't, you know. So we labored in the baby's room, in Kennedy's room, for about an hour at that point. So that took us to about 1 a.m. And then we started transitioning to the hallway and doing wall squats for every contraction with a rubber band or a band.
The rebozo.
Gotcha. That hooked on the door, and she would pull down on it and really go into a deep squat for her contractions. And then we would transition to the restroom and let her go in there. And it was one significant sound that Heidi heard from the restroom that let her know we're making moves to the hospital. And it was that grunt, that push that I think you said,
yeah,
let's roll.
Well, it's in combination, right? So her water was broken and she was making that primal guttural sound together. So at that point, it's like, well, I don't think you're going to be in labor for 20 hours,
right.
You know?
True.
And so she made a sound that made me go, okay, I think based on our previous conversations, how do you feel? Do you guys feel like it's time to go? And,
right.
And both of you guys were, we're ready to go.
We were. And I think a part of that was also just with it being the first, a little bit of just being scared, you know, in the process. And if something does go wrong, wanting to be at the hospital for that scenario. So, you know, on the edge of our seat, we were both kind of like, okay, when's the hospital call? You know, when is that going to happen? And it happened about, I think we arrived at the hospital around 2:30 or 3 a.m. on July 4th morning. Flashers and all, you know, we took off from the house. Heidi drove separate. Maybe not have been as a necessity as your situation.
I forgot about mine. Left it down there for 2 hours, so I realized it was still down there running with the hazards on.
Nice.
That's awesome. Abandoned the car.
The only
car in Elizabeth.
It's literally unlocked, running.
The only place in Charlotte you can leave a car and no one will take it. Running and everything. Keys in it. Yeah.
And I'd probably going to sleep that night. And the nurse goes, Did you ever move your car?
Yeah.
I'm like,
what car?
Probably run out of gas.
I love it.
Blocking people coming in the deck.
So we did that whole thing, you know, and then we, went on up. It took us about an hour to get to her room because she wasn't as dilated as we had thought. She was around a centimeter or two at that point in time. So about a 45 to an hour, we were in that triage room, which is fairly difficult. The nurses did the best they could because I was the only one allowed back. So Heidi kind of had to just stand out there and listen to Christina, you know, yell through every contraction, which was, I'm sure, as difficult for her as it was for me to hear them and not know what to do.
Right.
I kind of just instinctively went back to some of the things that you had done with Christina at the house, and we just maneuvered that as best we could. You know, we had the nurses turn the fluorescent lights off, which was great. So they were definitely ready to accommodate and do what they needed to do. So he moved us to a room. once in the room, we decked it out with lights and music and the whole 9 yards and words of affirmation on the wall and all that good stuff. Christina labored in the bathtub, which was her favorite place to be, was the bathtub.
They call it the aquadural.
The aquadural?
The
nice.
aquadural.
She did enjoy that. That was like her spot.
I will say too, though, that, we're going to get to this part, but like Christina was much further along in her labor than 1 centimeter dilated. So sometimes what happens is the cervix, all those early contractions, the cervix is getting thin and then it just kind of bursts open.
We were in a good position.
You were in a the baby was low.
The baby was really low,
Kennedy
but we were
low.
Yeah.
And so but all of the information that we got, that the baby was low, the cervix was like paper thin, and the way that Christina was, emoting her labor let me know, like, this isn't going to be a long day.
It wasn't. Yeah. So once in the room, Christina really labored. And I should mention again that my mom was in there. Her mom was in there, and also her sister, which is one of her best friends, was in the room as well. So we definitely kind of broke the number of people in the room code, but our head nurse was phenomenal. And when she found out Christina wanted to go the natural route, she was an advocate for that as well. So I really felt like we had a lot of people on our team that were advocating for us, including Heidi. So there was, a lot of eyes on Christina during this process, and I don't think it was easy on anyone, but it was definitely tolling. I did not realize it would be as tolling on myself as it was watching her labor that hard. And I say that long, 4 hours of that intense laboring, to the point where when she's screaming, where the other nurses are coming to our head nurse and saying, has she had that baby yet? Because my girl down here can hear her screaming, and what's going on? It's starting to scare the other girls because her scream is carrying down the hall, which is why I said it might have been us that was yelling.
Yeah.
But so
some women are quiet breathers. I don't know how did Kelly do it, but some women are quiet and some are very primal, guttural, loud. You don't know until the moment.
Right.
We heard on the phone in our house.
Yeah.
At the hospital, the 2 in the bathroom and then the 4 on the bed before we had Grace in, was primal is the best word I have found to be able to describe it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And hearing that level of just pain and anguish, and knowing that this was what she wanted, but also wanting my husband instincts to kick in to protect. When she went into transition on the bed, and she's kind of rolling around, she was sweating, she was nauseated. And her exact words, and I can actually quote these words, "Someone please save me," were her exact words, because it wasn't an easy process. And Heidi had told her, this is not going to be an easy process. But when those were her words, I felt like for me as a husband, that was my time to step in and say, okay, she's done all she can do. At this point, I have to do something. And I looked at Heidi and I said, I think we've got to do something at this point. She's worked her tail off. So we looked at the nurse, and the nurse was like, well, I've got to start on IV because she needs to have a bag or 2 of IV fluid before we can even.
And I'll say it wasn't just you, Cass. I'm getting glared at, over here by all the moms.
I would say we've got the moms in the room.
So the moms, okay.
And Christina's, making comments like that. And so it's definitely a tough position because I want to honor her wishes, as does Heidi, which is why we have her there. But we also have to take into context that, the things that she's saying, and is this the right time? And so we went ahead and with the head nurse, she was like, well, I got to get her an IV. And I think mentally for Christina, knowing that the IV was there and that the next step was the epidural, mentally it allowed her to reach a place of calm, knowing that there was a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Whenever that tunnel was going to appear, but there was a light. And so she could see that.
And I also stepped in right then and said everybody out.
You cleared the room.
Including me.
You cleared the room.
Said I'm leaving.
Yep.
The moms are leaving. The sister's leaving.
Were the looks
I'm like, the only people that need to be in this room right now are the nurse, Cass, and Christina.
That is very true.
I was like, everybody else needs to be out. And that's hard for me too. Like, I was like, but I recognize that the birth plan was pivoting.
Mm-hmm.
And the only people that needed to be part of that decision was your medical team and then the 2 of you guys. Yep. So we gave you space. And I just said, you text me whenever you're ready for anybody to come back in.
And I'm very glad you mentioned that, because genuinely I respected the fact that you stepped up and made that call and made that move in that situation. So we had that meeting with the head nurse, and she said, what do you want to do? She looked at Christina specifically, and Christina nodded, let's do something. Mm-hmm. At which point the nurse looked at me and said, she'll never make it. There's no way we'll make it to the epidural. She's too far along. The contractions are too close.
Oh, no way.
This baby's going to show up.
No way.
There's no doubt. So
you made the decision to have the epidural.
So the decision was made that we were going to have the epidural if and when the time was appropriate. But she had to get through a bag and a half of an IV because we didn't use any IV at that point. So they went ahead and got the IV in, which ended up being a great scenario for the way things ended up, which we'll get to that. But at that point, Heidi came back in. We invited Heidi back in, and Heidi looked at the nurse and said, her grunts and where we are, she's pushing. I can hear it in her soul. She's pushing right now. And the nurse said, well, grab a leg.
Get out.
And at that point, the nurses, the mothers came back in, and the sister, and Christina starts pushing. So we're holding legs. There's no
you and Heidi.
Yes.
No way.
The doctors are not in the room yet. The head nurse is still in the room, though, allowing this to happen, and we're pushing. And you can start to see the baby's head. Wow. It's crowning.
But you can also see Christina's relief.
I was going to say, and you said when you told her specifically, you said, I want you to do me a favor. When the next contraction hits, I want you to push against it. Is that the right time?
Yeah, like push
I want you to push against the contraction, to fight against it. Instead of letting your body have it and opening up and accepting the pain, I want you to push against it. And when she did that, you could tell that there was a sense of relief, because you don't have to accept the pain, you can fight against it. And at that point, when she started pushing, it was a completely different scenario, because Christina was able to step up and do what women do. And it was unbelievable. It wasn't like a few pushes, though. We definitely had a road ahead of us. But
she had like energy. She was kind of chatty.
She was back to us. Yep.
Wow.
She was back to us.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So this is where, like, this is just a teachable moment, right? When the mom gets to, no, I cannot do this anymore. No, someone save me. I've heard, I'm dying. I am dying right now. I'm dying. I cannot do this anymore. No. That is transition. That is the definition of transition. And it's like, you can't even describe it. But hearing you tell your story, Cass, I've been a doula for 15 years and I'm still learning. Every birth, I'm still learning. And this reminds me that I need to do a much better job preparing dads for transition when moms want to have a natural childbirth, because maybe I didn't do a good enough job preparing you for that level of watching your wife suffer for a little bit of time, because labor's painful. And then transition can be, if it goes on for a long period of time, like closer to 4 hours instead of 2 hours, right?
Right.
Your pain and will transition with it to suffering. And I think Christina was definitely there. We could see that she was,
I would agree,
suffering,
But what do you mean by that? Like, teach dads on the transition?
I guess if I could go back in time, I would have spent at least some time alone with Cass, saying, this is what you would be normal. This is what we're going to expect, right? Like, I think that I shared with you guys as a couple, like, this is going to be really difficult, but maybe pulling you aside and saying, like, maybe even like explaining like what that primal guttural, like what that, and I think too, like, I think at this point too, like, if I remember correctly, like the moms and the sister were like kind of freaking out too. Like, they were not.
Absolutely. I think at the end of the day, they were hearing Christina.
Like, I'm over here going, like, this is normal.
Exactly,
I'm like,
another day.
Me and the nurse are like, yeah, this is normal.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think this is what you want. I mean, not really. I don't think she wanted to experience suffering.
Right. But it was part of the pregnancy plan for sure. But no one, I don't think anyone can prepare you for exactly what that's going to be like. And I do, partially agree with you could have taken me aside and said, this is going to be bad, or these are things you might say, but I still think even in the moment, you can't be prepared for it, because it's your job. Completely different. Right.
It's your job or your role to protect your wife.
Right.
And you can't, I also feel like you're not going to coach somebody out of that role, because that's your, like, you stood there and said your vows and fell in love and committed that I will protect you.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, no, you're
and
right.
so I feel like that's kind of where I was like,
made that call.
I'm going to leave the room
Yeah.
so that Cass can step up right now as her protector,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So,
But that's one thing we haven't talked about today at all. I thought we were going to talk about a lot. And I think it's what you're getting at is instincts.
yeah.
Because I have been absolutely amazed at the natural instincts that I've seen out of my wife.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And even myself, that I had no idea was in her and me. It's like such a beautiful thing watching Kelly. Like, she didn't learn that.
Right.
She's just got it.
Exactly.
And it's a level of raw talent that I have seen in my wife that it literally makes my jaw drop. And I think it's one of the crazy, I figured we'd talk about it a lot today. We haven't at all. It's probably a whole another hour we could go on about it. But just what you're saying, you can't be prepared. These are instincts.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to take us home, basically.
No, you're exactly right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, absolutely not.
The thought hit me. I was like, we haven't talked about this at all today.
Yeah.
No, that's
You know,
I'm going to bring you guys back.
Yeah. We'll go into a whole another hour. Yeah.
Do you all agree with that, though?
Absolutely.
The instinct?
Fact.
I think it's staggering.
It's unbelievable.
To just, especially, I mean, your story is very different from mine, but what you see every like day, something new, and how you tackle it and how things just happen. It's mind blowing.
The first time I comforted him when he cried, I was like bouncing him, and then I was rocking him.
You don't even realize.
And I was like,
doing it, right?
nobody taught me how to do that. Like, where did this crap come from? You know, and it's just, and then I find myself legit watching Kelly.
Yeah.
Like, look at her go. Like, she was born for this.
Yeah, admiring.
Admiration it doesn't even begin to be the right word to use for it.
I agree. 100%.
And I think part of that is watching them in the birthing process. I mean, that's when we first, as men, start to see that.
Go, oh my goodness.
Holy crap, my wife is a rock star.
Right.
You know?
Right.
But long story short, we so we're all holding legs there. Doctor finally does come in. She pushes a few more times, and we end up having Kennedy there.
So you basically like delivered your own child.
Essentially, I had a leg. I was right there in the action, watching.
That's pretty awesome.
That is awesome.
Watching the head come, and it would come out, and it would go back in, and it was.
I think that would be my story if I were you. I delivered my own kid. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, no one else was there. So we did the delayed clamping, the whole thing. Cutting the umbilical cord, which no one tells you that it's actually fairly tough to cut.
It is.
It's not.
It's. I've cut plenty of cords, but I don't think
you really got to get in there. You got
to put some strength
absolutely
into it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you can't be coming in there soft. You really got to go at it. And so no one tells you that. So if there's any guys listening, you make sure you go at it. But
you're cutting through arteries and veins,
which makes sense. Logically, absolutely makes sense. So at that point, they take Kennedy away. The doctors are in there. We've transitioned to a new doctor at this point, who was great as well.
Oh yeah,
but she literally
delivered at shift change.
Wow. She showed up, 10 minutes before her shift. Probably trying to drink her coffee, and within 5 minutes, she was in our room.
No way.
And Kennedy's head was there, and she wasn't as aware of what we were doing as far as it being a natural birth and that whole, but she caught up very quickly. So they get Kennedy, they get her wrapped up, they give her to me. I'm in the corner with her, and at that point I've announced to Christina that we have Kennedy at this point. The names were Kennedy or Calhoun. So that's
by
when I got to
Kennedy, you were telling her.
I was telling Christina, I was like, "Hey, Kennedy's here," and I said it's Kennedy or something to that effect. Right. And Christina knew that it was a girl at that point.
No way! How cool is that?
Yeah, so it was fan. And like I said, all the moms were in the room. Sister was in the room. Heidi was there with us.
Did y'all practice that? Were you like, is that?
No, we had.
I'm going to call out so or like, how did that work?
Christina had said to the head nurse she wanted me to tell her if it was a boy or a girl.
She wanted you to tell her.
Exactly.
Okay.
Me saying it's Kennedy, it was
just kind of how it happened.
Natural. I literally saw her. I'm not gonna lie. I looked for about 5 seconds to see if I could see a thing, right? Make sure I didn't miss anything. And then I turned around and said, Christina, it's Kennedy.
I like how you did that instead of saying it's a girl. It's Kennedy.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah, so
that's awesome.
So we did that, and so I'm at that point. I moved to the couch, and I'm holding Kennedy, and they put Kennedy on Christina for just a few seconds, but she needed to finish out the process and everything. So they went in and let me do skin to skin. This is kind of where the story kind of transitions. Because we're waiting for the rest of the process to unfold, the placenta to drop naturally and go from there. And it doesn't. The umbilical cord actually breaks which leaves the placenta inside of Christina. So at that point, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of scratching heads, kind of like, okay, what's the next move? Christina's not on an epidural, so all this pain we just endured, where are we? Luckily, she'd been on IV. So I should also mention that while we're waiting on the placenta to drop, they actually put a few stitches in because so put a few stitches in. Well, when the umbilical cord breaks,
in before the placenta,
before there was.
Yes.
So
you want me to jump in?
Please, because I know that a few had been put in at that point, but
so the placenta usually delivers within like 5 to 30 minutes.
Right.
It can take up to like an hour.
Right.
But if it's not releasing right away, like their doctors are like, well, I might as well get like step 2, like so they can go ahead and stitch while they're waiting because the placenta is really soft and soft and mushy when it comes out. So you can stitch and then deliver the placenta. So
that just seems logically not right to me. Yeah. Okay.
But and I also think that part of that was Christina's body's in that fight or flight mode. It's in that adrenaline rush mode. Mm-hmm. She's just delivered a baby, so a lot of that pain feeling is numb, if you will, if I could speak for her, but so they put a few stitches in and we're waiting on the placenta and the umbilical cord breaks off and the doctor's just holding just the umbilical cord with no placenta at the other end, which draws a few red flags. And so I remember the doctor looking at Christina and she says, we have 2 options. I can go in and get it or we can go to the OR. That's our 2 options. And Christina had been bound and determined to not, do any medical intervention. Hindsight being 2020, we had this conversation yesterday. Christina says, if I knew what I was about to go through in those 2 hours, I would have went to the OR because that was
going to be under general anesthesia.
Right. So she would not have
been aware
of any of the process that was about to unfold.
You mean in the OR?
In the OR, she would have been under general anesthesia and would have had no idea what the process was going to be. So at that point, she elected, just let's do this. Let's get it over with and done. So I'm on the couch with Kennedy doing our skin to skin. They ask everyone to leave the room. I think including, you were in there with us? Mm-hmm. So Heidi remained, but they did ask the parents to leave. And at that point, they ended up basically digging elbow deep, if you will, for the next 2 hours, in which I watched Christina come unfolded out of the bed, screaming like I had not even heard in the contractions. Like, this is just next level pain while I'm holding Kennedy. Every time Christina screams, Kennedy cries. So it was and completely helpless in that scenario as well. And so that was definitely not a part of the process that obviously is not planned, but it's also nothing that you can plan, that you can expect to handle any certain way because you're just frozen.
I mean, how rare is that, Heidi? Rare?
It's very rare. It's why we ask the OBs not to tug or pull on the placenta for delivery.
You mean pull on the umbilical cord?
I mean, to pull on the umbilical cord.
Is it like a retraction? Is that what happens?
Just snaps off.
Yeah.
So it's very, very rare.
Snaps off where it's connected to the placenta.
Yeah. Oh. This obstetrician could not have been more sweet and mortified. Like she was, I mean, you could see on her face how rare I don't think it had ever happened to her before.
Really?
I've certainly never seen an entrapped placenta before.
There was the one time I heard the doctor and the head nurse say, this is the one time I would contemplate giving a postpartum epidural.
Wow.
Right.
Because of what we're about to experience.
Did they say that out loud to Christine?
They did say that out loud before they started digging or in the beginning of the digging process. And I say digging because it's truly...
I find that interesting you're using the word digging.
Because when you're sitting on the couch and you have a direct line at your wife...
So you're on the couch, the bed and the sink behind it like they all are, right?
Right,
yeah,
right.
Okay.
So I'm sitting on the couch and the bed's directly in front of me.
Right.
I'm holding Kennedy.
Right.
So I can see Christina's legs are still in the stirrups. And the doctor, I watch her hand go from finger to elbow and then come out with pieces of stuff and put it on a silver table. And sorry for the graphic details, but that's truly what I was watching. And it
for 2 hours.
And it felt like it literally felt like a hostile movie torture scene because it was that graphic and that painful to watch. And let alone, you're not watching a stranger go through this, you're watching your wife go through this process.
Yeah.
And it's a process that she 100% wanted because she wanted to go natural. And then this happened. And so it was very, very, I can't even describe how difficult it was. It's still to the day, like I said, we were talking about it yesterday, where, you know, you want to have that bonding time with your child. It's the first 2 hours that they're in the world, but you're also so concerned about your wife. And then instead of my wife bonding with Kennedy, it's more of her still in survival mode. And at this point, again, I mentioned the stitches that went in earlier. They've now ripped out because you have to go in. Yeah. And so it was really, it went from definitely a joyous occasion to something very, very dark.
That's dark. A level of trauma that people that are alive haven't experienced, right? Like people, there's...
It's an interesting way to look at it. People that are alive have never experienced it.
To go through that type of trauma, usually human beings don't exist after something that intense.
Like horrific car crash victims aren't conscious to go through that. Not a lot of
after going through a birth,
right?
Like that's intense.
And I think that's one thing that you and I talked about is, does Christina recollect that, or did she black out? And I don't think she recollects the level of pain because it's just the amount of pain that you can't recount again. Because
can't quantify anything.
Exactly.
Like
it's not like, I remember hitting my hand with a hammer.
No, I mean, labor didn't even touch it.
Right. It was next level. And no one was prepared.
Did she go into shock for those 2 hours?
Definitely. 1,000%.
She had to.
Usually, if it's that,
Okay. When you looked at her eyes, where it kind of looked like she was drugged, you know, like she just kind of looked like drugged, and definitely with the shakes like it was. She was definitely in physical shock.
Right.
Emotionally, I don't think she was. You know, I feel like from my perspective, it appeared to me that she was kind of outside of her body. Yeah. Like that.
Well, emotionally, she may not have had anything left. You know.
No, absolutely.
Wild. Yeah. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. It was definitely, you know, it's not my wife, you know. God, this is where I'm going to get choked up. I'm sorry. I can't even imagine it being someone that I love. I mean, not that I don't love Christina. I grow to love her through this experience. But I mean, it was very difficult to witness someone just be tortured. And one thing that I just feel like, you know, it's like I have trouble letting go from your birth story is that it was shift change and we asked for morphine like over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And somehow the morphine just kept not arriving.
It got put in the wrong IV and then it didn't get delivered.
And it's like, just give her a shot of morphine. Like, somebody do something.
Yeah.
So have you lost your patience at this point with the morphine thing?
You know, to be honest, at this point in time, I'm praying to God and I'm just saying, why? You know, at this point, it's that level of, really, this is where we are, this is where we've come, and this is what it's almost like you want to say, this is what you're going to let happen as a faith-based person.
Yeah.
And there's nothing I can do. So losing my patience or losing my cool or getting loud is not going to solve the situation because my wife's in traumatic pain and I just need to let the experts do what they're supposed to do.
And you have the grave responsibility of your
And I'm still holding
chest.
Kennedy at that point, still holding her. And, you know, like I said, every time Christina lets out, you know, just one of those screams because they're digging in her, Kennedy starts screaming. And so, you know, I'm trying to balance that. And so, you know, it was.
That's extremely admirable. There's a lot of men that would have walked out in the hallway and lost it.
I'm astonished you weren't in shock.
Yeah,
like a high, like you could actually be functioning and hold hold your daughter and be cognizant of what she's going through and be aware and be like emotionally there. And so you know that. Like, I don't know if
so I had that same thought though, but you know what I went to as soon as I thought that, when I thought a couple minutes ago? What did we just talk about before that?
I was literally about to say the same thing. Watching Christina do what she did, it was my turn. It
was the instincts. He didn't have a choice.
Exactly.
He had to take care of Kennedy.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like I thought that exact same thing 3 minutes ago, and I was like, no, that's the instincts. He doesn't have a choice.
Watching her do her thing, go through her transition, battle through, accomplish her goal of going natural. Now it was my turn to step up. And, you know, there was no pain involved for me physically, but the emotional toll was my turn to step up. It was my turn to take care of Kennedy, and it was my turn to handle that situation. And so, like I said, I have a whole newfound respect and love for my wife watching that. And not just that, you know, the whole process in and of itself, and how women truly just stop everything they're doing that concerns them and start looking at what concerns the child, you know, from the essential oils that you end up with in your house to the crazy diets that you end up with, you know, the whole spectrum, the whole gamut.
It's amazing.
But, you know, long story short, they ended up getting out the placenta. They did a few ultrasounds to make sure that everything was out. And that was the biggest sense of relief.
She okay now?
I mean, Christina bounced back within an hour.
Wow.
That's great. She was back and holding Kennedy, and our family was in, and we had more family coming in. At that point, it's about 7, 8 a.m., maybe actually closer to 10 a.m. at that point. And so, I mean, it's 4th of July, and, you know, Christina, that's her favorite holiday of all holidays is 4th of July. Perfect. And so, you know, the mood changed very quickly after that, but definitely still, you know, a traumatic process to look back at, and one that honestly, it's still debatable as to whether or not, you know, Christina should talk to someone about it or go through that process and what that looks like. But I mean, you talk about strong,
Oh man,
not even I don't even hold a candle to that. So
that's awesome.
But I mean, that's our birth story, you know, kind of in a nutshell.
Yeah. I think she should talk to somebody too. Yeah. And I hope tonight was a little bit healing for you just to share. I think that the more for all of you guys, I mean, I think that the more that we talk and share, you know, it helps us move through some of the things that we've been through that cause us grief. All of these are beautiful, joyous stories, but all of your journeys, there's a lot of grief and triumph to your stories too. So I just really appreciate you guys being here and just allowing me to be part of your journeys and trusting me with your wives and with, you know, helping bring your babies into this world. I hope we can do this again.
Well,
so thank you.
Thank you. I'm not going to speak for the guys, but thank you. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. And you ever need me to do it again, I will be here 100%.
Thank you for listening to Birth Story. My goal is you will walk away from each episode with a clear picture of how labor and delivery might go, and that you will feel empowered by the end of your pregnancy to speak up, plan, and prepare for the birth you want.